Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Office Hours for CS256, Mobile Web Development. I'm here with Sean Bennett, Course Architect at Udacity, and Chris Wilson, the Developer Advocate at the Chrome Developer Relations Team, and myself, Program Manager at the Chrome Developer Relations Team. So we're back, the second episode for answering all the questions that you've been asking online.
All the questions.
Last week we had a lot of questions, and they all came in during the show.
Yeah, which is awesome.
Which is great, and from all over the world too. So in the US we had a long weekend. We had Martin Luther King Day yesterday. I think quite a few people were off, and we're off to a bit of a slow start of the week. But we've had our coffee, and we're ready to answer some questions. So this week we're answering questions about lessons 4 and 5, and those are the fluid design and Flexbox and media queries lessons. And Sean, tell us a little bit about the work you've done on the fluid design or Flexbox, the problem sets. Like you came up with a pretty interesting
like
thing about
Flexbox demo.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I mean, when we were trying to figure out how to teach this and we went back and forth on this a few times, like figuring out how to get this across to users.
There were so many properties, and it started feeling like this long list of, well, there's this property, and you can use it this way and this way and this way, and it was really did not feel very.
And at first, it was basically just you talking through all of them one at a time to the student.
Yes.
And I remember you coming out like halfway through, and you're just like, "This is not going to work."
It felt like a lecture that was not even
this is never going to end.
A vaguely interesting lecture.
Yeah. So we were trying to figure out how to change that around, and I kind of came up with this interactive experience using the Chrome Dev Tools, which I think is way better than Chris just talking at you.
Nobody wants to hear that. Well, wait, you still hear that.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah.
So how does that work, Sean? So you're actually in the Chrome Dev Tools.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically just an iframe that listens for your input on the page in the iframe, and then you change properties of it in the Chrome Dev Tools, and when it happens, we fire off events and fire off web audio events, which Chris might know something about. But it was actually surprisingly easy to get something simple up and running. Making it work across the board and making it into a decent experience was quite a bit harder.
You did spend a lot of time kind of like, it's not quite perfect.
Yeah, it's not working in all the browsers.
Yeah,
which
that was always a challenge with DevTools.
But but I think the more we can do of that moving forward into the future, the better. I thought it was a really cool experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's really cool. Well, that's great. The power of DevTools is just getting more and more. It's just getting crazier and crazier. What you can do with it. So,
DevTools
great. Well, I wanted to just jump into the questions. First one is from SF in the Netherlands, my home country.
This is actually you, isn't it?
Yeah, is this you?
It's not, I swear.
It's your mother.
Speaking of Chrome DevTools.
Speaking of Chrome DevTools.
There is a warning that pops up when you use DPI. So consider using DPPX instead of DPI, as in CSS DPI. Should we use DPX, EM, DPI, or percentage? What?
That's a very subtle question.
Well, and the interesting thing is, this isn't anywhere near the entire list of units either.
Right.
You actually, go through all of them. So this question, I believe, is really about what you use to declare your media queries, because these are, I can't remember the precise term for them, but they're the resolution types, I think, is what they're called. So the difference between DPPX and DPI is essentially how many actual device pixels there are per CSS pixel. So the big difference between DPI and DPPX is whether or not it takes in that retina screen multiplier or not, which on mobile is sort of important. We'll talk a lot more about this in lesson 6 on adaptive images, responsive images. Realistically, in this particular case, if you're shifting on DPI, you're probably having to take responsive images and retina displays and that sort of thing into account. That's probably what you're trying to do. And either one of them will work. You just have to figure out, whether you want that multiplier built into your media query or not. So if you want to get actual physical inches on the screen, then you use DPI. And if you want, well, what's the rough resolution of my screen? But have that be with the weird. The second time I said that the system is lying to you in this past lesson, that's the multiplier I was talking about. As for the rest of the unit types, when you define how big something is on the screen, should you use EMs, PX, percentages, points, whatever? I mean, the best advice I can give is be consistent. Because if you tend to mix these units, you're going to find that some of them scale one way on a unit, on some devices, but they scale differently on different devices. Or my personal favorite, that weird thing where when you rotate an iPhone, it zooms up the unit types if you haven't carefully defined them with the reset style sheet and that sort of thing. So be consistent, and really any of them, again, will work. They will rescale slightly differently. EMs and percentages are approximately the same. PX is not actually as bad a unit as it used to be, on mobile devices at least, because it does get scaled. It's not really a pixel. It's not really a screen pixel. In fact, even on a lot of desktops now, desktop browsers, they started, certainly on the Chromebook Pixel, a pixel is not a physical pixel, or all your web pages would be really small. And that's true on Retina display MacBooks as well. So there's a lot of complexity in CSS units. I think you'll find in this particular case, DPPX is probably, just off the cuff, if I have to give a solid answer, I'd say, yeah, follow the Chrome DevTools advice. But it's not totally wrong to use DPI either. It's not. This isn't an error.
Right. It's just a warning. Right. Yeah. Great. Well, fantastic. So next question from Varun in Chicago. So I think you might have something to say about that, Sean. Yeah. Flexbox support is not there in every browser, and Flexbox is still not standardized. What is the motivation behind using Flexbox for this course, and what are the other options? So I think one of the first things I would like to throw in there before you tackle this is one of the ways to get a good sense of what's supported, and we mentioned it in the course, is use the Can I Use site, caniuse.com. Yeah, great site for quickly checking how far out the features that you're using.
Yeah, and if you want to get a good sense of like how much usage each browser gets, and on kind of a visual scale, I'd recommend using the beta version of that, and usage relative, which actually gives you a very clear visual representation of how many users would I actually be able to support?
Exactly.
I use this.
Otherwise, it gets you a sort of a percentage.
Otherwise they're all even, and just gives you a percentage, which is not as clear.
Beta.
90% of the browsers support it, but the browsers that don't are Chrome and IE. That's
right. So you should definitely use that. On the aspect of actual Flexbox support, it's actually relatively high if you consider the old Flexbox models as well. So Flexbox has gone through a number of specification changes, and he's right that it's not quite standardized, although I think the current version is pretty close to it. The good thing is you can actually polyfill most of this into the old specifications using either less or SAS mixins, or using a build step before when you're compiling your CSS, using something like auto prefixer, which is pretty cool. It'll basically autofill all of, not just for Flexbox, but for essentially all of your CSS. It'll auto vendor prefix, and you can specify what versions of what browsers you want to support. It's pretty cool. If you use something like that, then right out of the box you get essentially all of the modern browsers, and then also back to IE 10. So you don't get 8 and 9, which is a problem.
There is a real push toward this standard too, because Flexbox is such a fabulously useful tool. And I remember back after IE6, when I was in the Internet Explorer team, we set off to do this, what became the .NET Framework 3.0, and we were building the rendering and layout system for it, and we looked at all kinds of application user interface, and it turns out something like 95% of all of the app UI was basically either what is essentially Flexbox, flexible stacking boxes, or grids.
Right.
That's it. Like those are the two main tools you need, and the fact that CSS hasn't really had this easily usable, flexible stacking boxes system for so long is kind of a pain for web developers. I mean, there are ways to do things that are similar to that, like floating boxes, obviously. And if you really, really need to be running on every last old downgraded browser, you probably want to use those tools, but it is going to be a lot more challenging than Flexbox.
Yeah. And that's one of the big things is developer time.
Yes.
I mean, developer time, I can whip up just about any simple, standard layout for a web app you throw at me very quickly. With Flexbox.
Absolutely.
Whereas if I had to do the same thing with floating boxes and all that, then it would take a significant amount more time. So what you should really look at is what is the demographic for your actual app? What users are coming to your page with what browsers? And is it worth your time to actually support those?
Or can you support them well enough with one
something
of the
downgraded
polyfills or something?
And again, there's also, if you absolutely do have to support older versions of browsers, there's also JavaScript polyfills like Flexi.js. It's harder to get working. But
it takes a little more challenge in your content, but it is easier than trying to go do it yourself using CSS float or something like that.
Right.
So.
I would argue there's enough savings in developer time to make using Flexbox polyfills, either CSS mixins or JavaScript or whatever, hugely worthwhile.
Okay, right. Good. Didn't you also change your audio app to use Flexbox?
Oh yeah. I started.
I mean,
as I started really spending some time with Flexbox, I was like,
right?
"Wow, this is so much easier." And as I talked about last time, I think how I started going back through all of my old audio demos and recasting them to work well on mobile. And one of them that's actually somewhat useful on mobile, particularly, is I did this audio recorder, and it really is just a demo of how to use this library record.js and the live input stream from Get User Media, but the interface was kind of complex and somewhat awful. But it's really just like I have a microphone that you hit to start recording, and then a save button to download it to your system, and a couple of visualizers, and the first thing that I really wanted to do was you have to be able to rotate your phone. I mean, this happens all the time, right? As you rotate your phone. And of course, the easiest thing to do is just change the stacking layout and move the buttons over to the side, because the visualizers have to be wider than they are tall, which of course makes it hard to position. So I immediately redid them with Flexbox. I think it took me like 15 minutes to totally rebuild these things and have them adapt when you rotate using media queries. And that shows how much easier it is. And they all align properly. Like the buttons are centered and nice looking.
I mean, and especially for someone who's more of a beginner web developer, it's so much easier. I was tutoring someone, and she was having a huge amount of problems laying out her web page. And then I showed her Flexbox, and it literally took her I think 20 minutes to redo her entire app.
Yeah. I mean, you also have to keep in mind that what we're trying to educate people here for is the current platform that we have, and also where we're headed, and build the right set of future skills. And I think by the time you're deploying things that you've built in this class, you'll find the mix actually is pretty heavily in favor of Flexbox.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there are a bunch of other things in the course that we talk about, particularly in device access, that are kind of like, yeah, there are these ideas. They're kind of cool, and they may work on a Chrome Canary on a particular platform or something, but don't really use them yet in production stuff. This is really this is supported across all of the main browsers. There are always old browsers to deal with.
There is another exception that I forgot to mention, is that in Firefox there is a problem currently with they don't support FlexWrap and FlexFlow, I believe. But
it's already fixed, right?
But it's already fixed. So the current version of Firefox, I think, is version 26, and in 28 it's already fixed. So that's maybe 12 weeks out. So it's not a huge concern.
Yeah.
Woohoo! Auto updating.
Yes.
Evergreen browsers. Love it.
All right. So next question is from Javi in Spain. He says different screen sizes may lead to be able to fit a variety of amount of information into the screen.
Okay.
But how can you keep in sync the execution of code that only affects an area that's visible in a large screen and hidden in a small screen? So. If I understand it correctly, maybe sort of the desktop version of the same single page app and a mobile version that doesn't show maybe as many settings or something.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges with building a single scalable application is pieces of code that don't execute in one platform or another, one scenario or another, or even harder, pieces of code that execute differently across different platforms. I will say in this particular case, it sounds like if it's not executing in a smaller screen size or something at all, like if it's just a user control or something that's simply not there, well, it doesn't really have to stay in sync. It's just not there, and make sure that it doesn't break or cause problems. Or obviously, you would want to try to not have that code library downloaded even because you're just chewing up execution network speed. But other than that, it's really testing is probably the best advice I can give.
Yeah,
and I guess some of that just gets synced with the server anyway.
Right.
And if it's used in the desktop app, you would have that in sync for another time. If you're not using it, you just don't.
Yeah, presumably the in-sync portion isn't really shouldn't be that hard. It's keep it in sync on the server, and if you don't use it, you don't use it.
Yep. Okay, cool. So Dab in Alabama, in addition to different screen sizes, do you recommend considering different connection speeds when designing for mobile web? Actually, just touched on that.
Yeah.
With the don't download this library if you're not going to use that feature.
Yeah. So hold that question. No, don't really hold that question. But when you get into the performance lesson 7, I believe, we talk a lot about different connection speeds and that sort of thing. The big challenge with this one is, of course, you should consider different connection speeds, but more to the point, how your app is going to react in different network environments and scenarios. Because it turns out it's not about, well, I should have one version that's for Wi-Fi and one version that's for 4G, because the world doesn't actually work that way. Like, you can't just say, well, I'm on Wi-Fi, so bandwidth's free, woohoo. I mean, I get this every morning. I'll get in the car, and I'm in my driveway, and before I actually put the car in gear and take off, I check the traffic, because it turns out there's like 3 different ways to get to my office, and sometimes one of them is really bad, and so I want to check which one. The problem is, as I'm walking out the door, my phone goes off of my house's Wi-Fi and goes on to 4G.
Oh yeah, right.
But somewhere in there, like, it takes it a little while to adjust, and sometimes it stays connected, but it has a horrendously bad connection. Like, it's very, very slow. Takes it a while to pick up the idea that, oh, maybe I should just drop the Wi-Fi and go to 4G. And 4G can be quite fast. So the biggest challenge is designing for a system where you're not loading anything over the network that you don't need to at any given point in time, and that your app responds well to these sort of connection degradation. One of the biggest challenges, and we talk about this in the performance section too, is looking at what the network status is. It's really hard to even know how good your bandwidth is, like whether you should be using an approach where you're just dumping everything across the network, or whether you should be caching everything.
Yeah.
And I think that if there was an easy way to tell that, if you absolutely knew bandwidth is free, back to your server right now, go party on it, then I would say, sure, you should be considering the network speed when you design for it. The challenge really is that you can't know that. I mean, you have to know, hey, I'm on the mobile web and network bandwidth isn't free, but frankly, desktop bandwidth isn't always free either.
Sure.
I was staying somewhere over the long weekend that I had my laptop out, and the Wi-Fi there, like, the Wi-Fi connection was great, but the actual bandwidth from there to the world basically was really pretty awful. I mean, it would lag, and some websites would take just forever to come up. So, design your app around that scenario, I guess, is the best advice. Not just, consider what your network speed is on the mobile web, but figure out how you can get your app to run well, even when network is not a consistent, high bandwidth connection.
Yeah. And a lot of that, again, comes back to test it out on spotty networks, test it on 3G.
Yes, and there are a bunch of tools where you can test with different network
Charles Proxy would be great.
With Charles Proxy and things like that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, all right. Another question from Javi in Spain. Not exactly on topic, but we'll take a stab at it anyway. When deploying a packaged web app, which is the best way to send data? As JSON and load it at first run in IndexedDB. Wouldn't that waste the user's device storage? The same info is loaded twice. Think of a dictionary with no server side, not even to load the data. So, not sure if I entirely understand it, but.
So it sounds like the question is, you've got an app with a bunch of local data. So he uses the scenario of a dictionary with no server side. So, you want a web page with a big dictionary in it. And what's the best way to get that data onto the mobile app? I would say, I think that, for that precise, very narrowly defined dictionary kind of app, dictionary with no update kind of app, hey, you can just have a JSON file that's part of your app, part of your package. If you're using app cache, it's actually part of the cache. It's cached on the system. In fact, this is how we currently do the data for the conference app. Is it's just a JSON file embedded in the directory. We actually were getting to change that because we do want to update it. The reason to load it into IndexedDB would really be if you if you want it indexed, if you want to do lookups, if you want to do data manipulation on it or something like that, it would make a lot of sense. If, on the other hand, this were something that was getting loaded over the network and you might want to update it over time, you might just say, you know what, I'm going to do IndexedDB and only IndexedDB. I don't have a JSON file too. It could be kind of wasteful for the user's device storage if you had it in a JSON file and then you loaded it into IndexedDB, could get cleared. Keep in mind that IndexedDB can go away. It's not guaranteed to persist. If I go into my browser settings and I say wipe everything, it's going to wipe that IndexedDB, but it's not going to wipe the JSON file that's on the server. So the other thing you can do is just, when your app is loaded the first time and it looks in IndexedDB and says, hey, there's nothing here, or any time that it's loaded, it looks in IndexedDB and says, there's nothing here, and it goes and grabs a JSON file over the network. That's another reasonable way to do it.
Yeah, that's good. Good. Cool. Next question from QJ in Palestine. I've completed all the exercises and videos successfully, but don't feel confident I have mastered the topic. I need more practice applying the concepts of media queries and how to apply Flexbox. Can you recommend some resources? So, yes.
So there are a lot of good resources out there, as it turns out. And, a lot of the standard ones, I think. We've actually got a wiki page with a bunch of external resources if you check the class wiki.
Yeah, for all the classes we've added additional reading, additional materials.
There's a lot of HTML5 rocks articles and other things. In terms of getting practice, though, applying concepts, a lot of that is building your own projects. Find, for example, if you're applying Flexbox, find some of your favorite apps that you use all the time, and just look at them and figure out, okay, well, how would I do this if I was redesigning it using Flexbox? And just try it out. Even if it's just as simple as a few different colored boxes that are labeled, sidebar, navbar, all that stuff. That still gives you a pretty good idea of how you would actually construct it at a layout level.
Or if you're looking for practice applying these, what I would suggest is take your mobile device, browse around for a while, find a site that's broken, that doesn't work well, and then just go grab a copy of the content for that site, some subset of it, just save it out to an HTML file, to web resource files, and hack on it and figure out how to make it a good presentation, a good adaptive presentation.
Yeah.
I think obviously, the end result of that is just learning. You're not actually going to republish that content.
Right. Yeah.
But it is a great way to figure out how to apply these concepts into the real world.
Yeah, and the same goes for media queries and everything too. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Anything doing with layout, a great example is find something broken and fix it.
Yes, there's plenty of broken things out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like you said, just start your own project, and you're going to be struggling in no time.
Yeah,
How does that work? Right.
And again, if you can't think of your own project, just find something you like or you use regularly, and just try and recreate it. Go through the steps and think, okay, how would I do this? Something you care about is generally easier to build than something you aren't going to use.
I mean, this is where the example of using reformatting my blog came from.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, well, what? Right. How can I show this? Applying this to something that already exists that's broken. Oh yeah, that blog that I haven't done anything with in a while.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. SF is asking another question, and that we can probably take offline. A question that he asked on the forum about the conference app and didn't seem to work. It seems to miss several files. So why don't we take a look at that offline? I don't think
probably a more involved
here, but let's. So we'll take a look at that today, and we'll post an answer in the forum question like we did last week.
Yeah.
And hopefully that answer was useful. The final question, and we always say that, but there may other ones may still be rolling in. Exactly.
Yes.
Is do you have any podcast recommendations? I have one.
Okay.
And it's The Web Ahead.
Yes.
I love that podcast. Jen Simmons does a fantastic job.
Yeah.
It's actually The Web Ahead was the original one, and then she started talking to, I think, Eric Meyer, and started saying, there's a lot of history that can help us learn with the future. I think you were on...
I've been on the Web Ahead and the Web Behind.
The Web Behind, right. I've only been on the Web Ahead.
Trust me, it's better that way. Look forward. It's getting better all the time.
Yeah, so the Web Ahead, you can download it in any of their podcast players or in anywhere you get podcasts. So the Web Behind is just a version of that. So any other?
I mean, those are big ones. I don't listen to a huge amount of podcasts. Most of the stuff that I watch, I generally watch videos or screencasts as opposed to listen to podcasts.
Well, that's probably the other recommendation. Is kind of it's not a podcast, but the Chrome channel on Google Developers Live.
Yeah.
I hear that's great.
It's not just great; it's awesome. Check that out for
if you're looking for videos too. The recorded material from SFHTML5 is really good.
Always.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to make that plug, but you did.
Particularly that WebRTC session.
Exactly. So actually, you can find all those on bit.ly SFHTML5 videos with an S. So we have over 888,000 views on that content already. So
there's a lot of good stuff there.
Check it out.
Looking forward to the WebGL one.
That's right. This Thursday we're having a great WebGL event. 4 speakers. Definitely tune in for that. It will be live streamed on GDL. So that'll be a big one. It's already posted. A couple days to go. It should be a great episode. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, and this came up on Twitter, is all of these live sessions that we're doing, the live office hours. So we're answering the questions live, but on Google Developers Live, the nice thing is that everything that's being streamed live is immediately available as a recording after the show is over. So that's actually something you can kind of take as the rule of thumb for any episode you see. If it's live, you go to that same URL, like even literally a minute or so after, and it's already there in recorded format. Sometimes we do a little bit of trimming of the intro if we run a little bit of like for example, a half hour of intro music is probably not what you're interested in, and that takes 12 to 24 hours. Right. There's that. Sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah.
But so that's how that works. So definitely we're here live. You can ask the questions and vote for them ahead of time, and you can do that for next week's episode already. All of these are up on the Google Developers Live channel, and they will also be recorded and available later. So.
Yeah. It looks like there has been one more question.
Great. Okay, I knew it. So this is from Dan in Tucson, Arizona. My apologies if this has been already addressed. I had a lot of trouble with the embedded tutorials in lessons 4 and 5, not advancing properly. Am I doing something wrong, or is a fix coming?
Yeah, so this was actually addressed last week too, but the main issue is getting the recordings and everything done. So we've recorded some new material for that. It's, you know, we need to get it edited and then up on the site. It's just a matter of time, and we'll let people know when that has been updated.
Great. Okay. Cool. All right. So well, that completes this episode. So next week we're going to be covering lessons 6 and 7. You can already ask your questions. Go to developers.google.com/live/Chrome. And then you can find all of the different office hours sessions. We may even bring in some experts on particular topics. I know 2 weeks from now you will be out, so we'll see if we can get a performance specialist in. I think I know one.
Yeah, maybe. I'm interested to see questions on both performance and responsive images.
Yeah,
because those are topics that are very interesting to me personally.
Okay. Well, great. So. With that, I will wrap it up. And thanks, Chris and Sean.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. See you next week.
See you guys.
See ya.